Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. I have some opening remarks to share, but I will keep them brief so we can honor your time. My name is Dr. Karen Morosky-Rigney, and I'm one of the two associate directors of the Writing Center at Michigan State University. I want to take a few minutes to welcome you all to the fourth event in our speaker series, Writing Centers and Access. I'd like to direct your attention to the email where you received your Zoom link to join us today. In that email, there's information on how to navigate our webinar space, and I've also re-added that link to the chat in the webinar. I'd like to note that today's talk will be recorded so we can share the event asynchronously via our Writing Center's YouTube channel and on our website. And lastly, after our time together ends, we'll reach out to you again via email one last time with the response survey regarding today's event. I'd like to thank the Cal Engaged Pedagogy and Programming Event Fund for making this event possible, and our grant co-authors at the Center for Language and Teaching. And I'm especially grateful to the Citizen Scholars Program for their incredibly generous funding, which enabled us to secure ASL translation services and CART captioning for all events. I'm also grateful to the administrative team of the Writing Center here at Michigan State University, Dr. Trixie Smith, Dr. Grace Pregent, Colton Wansittler, Monica Schellberg, and Amanda Broman. Lastly, I want to thank the members of our Writing Center's Accessibility Committee who have worked tirelessly to put on these events for you and for me and for our community. I gave more extended opening remarks at the first event of this series, and if you'd like to view them, the link to that script is in your information email as well. For now, in the interest of your time, I'd like to turn things over to Kenlia Pebbles, a graduate student who works for our Writing Center's Accessibility Committee and who is currently my co-instructor for our Writing Center's training course. She's going to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Stephanie Kerschbaum. Kenlia, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Stephanie L. Kerschbaum is currently a associate professor of English at the University of Delaware, and beginning July 1st, 2021, she will be an associate professor and director of the expository writing program at the University of Washington. Her first book, Toward a New Rhetoric of Difference, won the 2015 4C's Advancement of Knowledge Book Award, and she is the co-editor of Negotiating Disability, Disclosure, and Higher Education. Her work has appeared in a range of journals and collections, and she's currently at work on a book called Signs of Disability, focused on how disability becomes available for noticing in everyday encounters. She loves to hear about all kinds of signs of disability from other people. We are very thankful that Dr. Kerschbaum was willing and able to join us here today and participate in the Writing Center at MSU and the Citizen Scholars Program's Writing Centers and Accessibility, a speaker series. We are looking forward to learning more about how to put Dr. Kerschbaum's work, which explores the importance of everyday interactions, intersectional identities, and our embodied connections in writing, into action and practice. Her work is informative and productive, and it supports people who are near and dear to me. So please excuse me if my bias is showing. As someone who works with the communities at the heart of her research and writing, starting with the work I did at University of Michigan Flint Writing Center and Flint Public Schools, including Dirac-Turimont and the Michigan School for the Deaf. I know we will all gain insight into our own practices and work today. With no further ado, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Stephanie L. Kerschbaum.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me just click. And I'm going to just get started. If there are access issues, I do invite you to say something in the chat, and I will do my best to make sure that I make any necessary adjustments. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I live and work is part of the ancient homeland and traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape people. And I pay respect to Lenni Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. I also want to recognize that the university at which I work and the university hosting this talk are land grant institutions that have long benefited from land forcibly stolen from indigenous communities across the United States. And then just a few access notes. I'm going to be giving you a couple of chances to think and reflect during this talk. And this is a good time if you want to pull together anything you might need or want to have at the ready for that purpose, whether a notebook and a pen and pencil, or a program on your computer or a tablet or something else. For visual accessibility, I'll describe myself briefly. I'm a white cisgender woman, and my pronouns are she and her. I have short brown hair, and I'm wearing a black and white striped shirt and red plastic framed glasses. And then I'll be describing a number of images that I'll be displaying throughout the talk. But I invite additional description by those attending, and I believe that you can use the Q&A function to add comments or questions throughout. I want to thank Karen and the team at Michigan State who have pulled this speaker series together. And I want to thank the card captioner and the ASL interpreter for the access work today. I'm giving this talk at a moment in which access is being reimagined for many, while at the same time, existing inequities are being exacerbated. We are also seeing renewed violence enacted against numerous groups, most recently involving the mass murder of 8 people, including 6 who were Asian or Asian American women. And these trends have been predicted as outcomes of rhetorical practices and behaviors that have become more and more public. And I mention this because writing center work, like all interactions we have, are part of this world, not separate from it. In this pandemic moment, I have heard many people celebrate, rightly so, ways that technological developments and resources have enabled us to continue to teach classes, meet and interact virtually, and learn from one another by attending talks like this one. However, we are far from being able to universally celebrate the accessibility of this moment. Those who are least resourced and least supported by their institutions and by wealth are experiencing the least access to an all online environment. And online spaces are deeply inaccessible for many people, including many disabled people, and are no less fraught in terms of questions of safety. And previous speakers in this series have taken up many of these challenges, thinking about how various kinds of environments and cultures and practices in higher education all contribute to unequal experiences of access and accessibility. Today, I will focus in on thinking about writing center context and environments and practices, and to give you a chance to meditate on your own writing center surround. I hope that this will be an opportunity to bring together some of the different conversations that you've been listening to in this series, as well as to reflect on the experiences that you've had in working in, moving through, and engaging in writing center related work. Some questions that this talk will raise, but not necessarily answer. How have seen the writing center work changed or shifted under COVID-19? How have we taken up accessibility in writing center work amid pandemic and social justice disruption this year? Where and how do you notice disability interacting with your responses to these questions? In the bulk of my time today, I'm going to share a number of images on my slide and talk through a concept that I have been calling signs of disability to give you some provocation to think through and perhaps engage as you open up and engage in conversations with others in your writing center work. I'm not going to claim to know all of the ways that signs of disability might emerge. So I also hope to learn from you what comes up for you as I talk and what you might add to the examples and illustrations that I suggest here. Writing center sessions have always been really interesting to me because of the way that tutors and visitors to the center are often in the process of building a relationship, figuring out how to work together, drawing on sometimes very limited information. But these interactions never occur in the complete absence of information. There are always cues that we are noticing, seeking out, ignoring, or just not paying attention to that all contribute to how we decide how to behave or what to say or how to navigate a particular moment. The image on this slide is the cover of my book, which is yellow with various sun logos on it. In my first book, Toward a New Rhetoric of Difference, I described a process of coming to know others through interaction in terms of marking difference. And I described marking difference as a means by which people displayed markers of difference, which I defined as rhetorical cues that signal the presence of difference between one or more interlocutors, and that they do so to position themselves and others in some kind of relation. In the recordings that I analyzed of students navigating peer review, I found that they regularly displayed or made available a range of cues that they hoped would help other people recognize the self that they were putting forward. When students felt that the self that they wanted to put forward was the self that others were reflecting back to them, they were more willing to engage. And in contrast, when that self that others reflected back was not one that they recognized or not desirable in some way, they would withdraw or pursue other avenues of interaction. Marking difference happens in writing center tutorials too, and understanding our own patterns of marking difference can be an important move to better understand how we are doing writing center work. Unearthing patterns of marking can reveal the assumptions that we make in order for interaction to proceed smoothly. Oftentimes, these assumptions are useful and necessary because they make it possible for a conversation to proceed. But they can just as often reflect implicit biases and contribute to micro and macro aggression that frustrate productive conversation. I also want to stress that interactions take place within institutional contexts and environments that encourage some kind of noticing and discourage others. In every writing program and writing center that I have been part of or visited, I've heard different kinds of typical stories about the kind of people who regularly visit the center, about the institution's student body, about the geographic area or region that the institution or center serves. These typical stories are not always articulated aloud, but they are often drawn on as material for interaction or as ways of kind of thinking about what kind of small talk is acceptable or useful to get a conversation started. And often in those early interactions, as writers and tutors may first be coming to know one another. The image on this slide is a yellow diamond-shaped deaf person and area sign planted in a suburban neighborhood. In the years since completing Toward, I have continued to think about I have continued to think about difference as it worked in my own life, which meant considering race and gender, but also disability and significantly later deafness as particularly important differences for attention and study. So I paid attention to my own choice making around clothing, hair, and physical appearance. I noticed my reaction to various physical and virtual environments. I attended to shift in my ongoing relationships in my workplace and in my personal life. And I paid a special attention to my growing awareness of how whiteness operated in my actions and perception, as well as how misogyny and gender-based discrimination functioned in my interactions with others. In this, I became interested in not only how disability materialized as I interacted with other people, but also how experiences of disability influenced interactional choices and rhetorical practices. But to do this work, I needed to be able to account for the materiality of the world and of body-mind. And I'm going to deviate from the script briefly to mention that body-mind is a term from Margaret Price, P-R-I-C-E, Margaret Price's work that talks about the way that bodies and mind don't act independently of each other, but really are mutually implicated. So of body-mind moving in shared interactional space. My response has been to develop signs of disability, which I define as perceptual cues that point to disability in some way, shape, or form. With the term perceptual cues, I'm focusing not only on spoken or written utterances, as I did in Toward, but to the full range of ways that we take in and process sensory input to make sense of the world and position ourselves and others. Visual perception has gotten a great deal of attention, and it will continue to, given the dominance of visual perception in shaping what many people know and interpret. But perception is always multisensory. And this is a point in which I want to pause and give you a moment to kind of reflect on your own writing center context. It might be work that you're doing right now during spring 2021, or you might think back to a past encounter or the writing center environment that you worked in before moving online. What do you notice? What kind of sensory perceptions are at work for you in this memory? What can you feel, sense, take in, interpret from your surroundings? I'll give you about 2 minutes. Okay, it's been about 2 minutes. Of course, you can continue to write or doodle or draw or add to whatever it is you're thinking about. So this slide featured a screenshot from the Harvard College Writing Center website, which references support for writers with disabilities in its opening text, as well as in a drop-down menu at the bottom of the screenshot. So there are some perhaps obvious places to start when looking for signs of disability in the Writing Center. Are there references to commitment to accessibility and or accommodation? Do the websites acknowledge or have relationships with disability resource centers, disability cultural centers, or other disability-related units? Are there indicators within the center's physical arrangement or materials or resources that disability is expected and or anticipated? Are there conversations about ways that writing might feel, look, or be enacted differently for writers with and without disabilities? Are there presumed normative conceptions of writers that undergird invitation to visit the center? Do centers offer illustrations or images of what sessions might look like, how they function and unfold, what people might expect when they visit the center? Is the building physically accessible? Does the center's furniture layout and design support different ways of moving within it? What does one need to do what does one need to be able to do to be fully present in this space, recognizing that such needs are not always or only about disability? While explicit references to disability may be the most readily apparent signs of disability, not all signs are this obvious. In fact, they can also emerge through what I have come to call disattention, which is this intentionally awkward made-up term where I separate the prefix dis from the word attention and italicize it and use a hyphen. It's all kind of awkward, and I like it to kind of call attention to the way that disability is often set aside or reserved for special times and places. But it can also playfully invoke the way that disabled people or people with particular relationships to disability build ways of paying attention from those lived experiences. On this slide, I'm showing you a screenshot of the University of Wisconsin-Madison Writing Center blog, and it featured a post titled, "The Online Writing Center is About Equity for Students and You Too," by Maggie Bertucci, Bertucci, Hamper. And it shows a photo of Hamper, who is a white presenting woman in the lower right corner. And so how do writing center sites present, invite, and encourage various kinds of presence and support for writers and for tutors? Who they imagine as potential visitors to their site? How are writers and or tutors encouraged to imagine themselves in the writing center? What groups or individuals do the site highlight and recognize as relevant to their mission and practice? And I'm going to show a number of different Writing Center homepages to show the range of ways that this happens. And so this is the homepage of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Writing Center, which features a collage of head and shoulders images of Writing Center staff smiling in various formal and informal contexts. And this is the homepage of the Spelman College Writing Center, which features a header image of a Black woman sitting at a desk and smiling at the camera, and a brief description of the center's online writing session during the pandemic. This is the homepage of the Washington College Writing Center, and it features a large header image of a close-up of two white presenting women who are sitting close side by side and appear to be looking at a text together. And this is the homepage of the Miami-Dade College Reading and Writing Center, which features an image of a Black woman sitting at a table with an open book and a pen. Text on the page describes what the center does and offers various contact information options. Where and how do we learn about the writers that we interact with in the Writing Center? And this image on this page is Humboldt State University Writing Center page that has instructions for how to make an appointment. And there is a video just above the instruction that walks through the instructions in video form. While procedures vary at many writing centers, when tutors show up for their writing center shift, they may find a list of the appointments that they have scheduled. The information provided in that appointment list can range from simply time slots with names next to them to online portal where the tutors have to log in and maybe get access to a range of information about a student or about a writer. I've seen portals where tutors can see the writer's year in school or the class that they've signed up for, a brief description of what they're bringing for their appointment, the course that they're coming to the center for, and lots of other kinds of things. Any information that is shared with tutors prior to an appointment can provide material supporting how the tutor approaches the session. But just as this information may be constructively used, for instance, by enabling the tutor to prepare or have at the ready particular resources, it can also serve to reinforce biases or constrict possibilities. There's no limit to the cues that may be potentially relevant for shaping a writing center interaction or the way that disability might be signaled or not. Tactility and temporality matter too. So I've been showing you a lot of visual images, but I want to really keep reinforcing that all of these are multi-sensory. So we're not just thinking about visual access to interfaces, but how those interfaces are navigated using a range of different kinds of devices, and thinking about how quickly or far in advance people need to set up appointments. Are appointments generally available at the last minute, or does one need to always be planning ahead? And then thinking about interfaces that where the tutors are often filling in or communicating information about their tutorial. I'm also interested in thinking about the kind of control or input that writing center visitors may have over how they are identified and described. What information can people choose to display? What information may be pulled from institutional databases or records, and it can include pronouns, preferred names, areas of study, and other demographic details that institutions often track. Is there a space for writers to mention any accommodation or access needs? How about when tutors have access needs of their own? What kind of things do tutors write about or perhaps describe about writers in the session report? Who sees the session report and who learned from them or uses them in some way? How do physical spaces and environments shape interactional possibilities? The image on this page is the cover of Amy, A-I-M-I, Hamraie, Hamraie, Amy Hamraie's book, Building Access. In their book, Building Access, Amy Hamraie describes how buildings and environments project images of the bodies and minds that are expected to come into and use them. And central to Hamraie's work is their concept of access knowledge, which they define as regimes of legibility and illegibility that emerge from interdisciplinary concerns with what users need, how their bodies function, how they interact with space, and what kind of people are likely to be in the world. What kind of access knowledge are embedded in our writing center spaces? What does it look like to build access knowledge and to have a broader sense of the range of possibilities for moving with and around access and accessibility? I've visited a number of writing centers in traveling to give talks at different institutions, and every one of them has had their own flavors. Many of the images on writing center websites focus on showing people rather than spaces, but we do get some glimpses of the variety of writing center spaces in some of the screenshots that I've shared. Some writing centers are a single room with tables and chairs throughout, and others may have multiple locations or be set up on tables in well-trafficked parts of campus, be centrally located in a library, or hidden in the basement or corner of a building on the edge of campus. Wherever the center is and however it is arranged, it makes assumptions about what writers will need to navigate a tutorial. Often tables and chairs, sometimes divided to muffle sound or provide privacy. Sometimes screens with laptop hookups to look at or work together on digital projects. How the tables are set up can make assumptions about the way that writers and tutors should sit. Are they able to rearrange and sit in different configurations, or do they always have to sit side by side? What kind of soundscape does the writing center have? And how did that matter to the tutorial that unfolds? What other kinds of visual and multisensory stimuli are part of the writing center space? This image is a GIF of the Brandeis University Writing Center showing what an online tutorial might look like. And it showed two people in Zoom squares and a Google Doc that is being shared on screen. And you see the mouse moving, the chat function, and the Google Doc, a Google Doc being shared. I did not always find information on writing centers, physical spaces, and environments on their website. And indeed, during this pandemic moment, these physical spaces are likely difficult to access or closed entirely. Some writing center websites included information about online sessions, and I particularly appreciated this GIF because of the way that it provides some visual detail about what those online sessions look like and how they might work. Although I rarely found written descriptions of the visual artifacts, and I did not analyze the Writing Center website for their accessibility features, which would be another important conversation to have. In what ways is the environment of the Writing Center made available for potential visitors to be able to predict what kind of accessibility moves they might need to ask for or make for themselves. Is your writing center a loud, bustling space? Is it relatively quiet with semi-enclosed or semi-private areas for consultation? This is the homepage of the University of Delaware Writing Center website, which showed two people sitting opposite one another at a table and looking at a screen mounted on the wall between them. And it had the caption, "The UDWC is all online. Make an appointment for either e-tutoring or online tutoring." Building a repository of what him or I described as access knowledge and of the different ways that people have needed to move in the Writing Center can support decisions about what to display and proactively make available on the website, as well as what can be presumed or might not need to be displayed. Often, for instance, I assume that newer buildings will be built with legally mandated ADA specifications that enable wheelchair accessibility, but that did not mean that the room configuration or furniture arrangement will be readily available or accessible to someone using a wheelchair. Directional signage matters too, as do assumptions about the kind of text that can and will be discussed. Here at the University of Delaware, we have this fantastic multimodal writing center. It's set up in our library. I think it's great. There's so much that I love about it. And at the same time, it presumes a lot of tutor flexibility in terms of being able to access many of these texts, which can incorporate audio and or video files and lots of web-based or digital elements. At a moment when many writing centers have moved tutorial sessions online, how are those spaces configured and designed? What options do tutors and writers alike have to adjust or change settings or configuration? What assumptions about accessibility, internet bandwidth, technological sophistication are embedded in the tutorial design? Earlier, I showed an image of the UW-Madison Writing Center blog about online writing centers as a means of supporting equity for students. And how do writing center training documents and materials imagine accessibility and prepare tutors to build access knowledge? And what assumptions are embedded into the flexibility to meet different kinds of student needs? In 2015, Elizabeth Hassler, Hassler, she worked as a peer consultant while an undergraduate at Humboldt State University, and she delivered a brilliant presentation up for Seed titled "Always Be Disclosing: Knowledgeable Bodies, Kathy Snow, and Teaching with My Body Language," in which she unpacked normative assumptions embedded in writing center peer tutoring literature. In that talk, she critiqued the Bedford St. Martin Guide for Peer Tutors presentation of desirable body language for tutors to exhibit in tutorials, including the following quote, which is from the Bedford St. Martin Guide, and it was helpfully illustrated with a series of stick figures. "Your posture is just as important as your grandmother always said it was. Sit or stand erect if you want to be seen as alert and enthusiastic. When you slump in your chair or lean on the wall, you look tired. No one wants to do business with someone who has no energy." In her presentation, Hassler included a description of the stick figures, and this is a screenshot from her presentation. And this is Hassler's description. Stick figure with hand on hips overlaid with the no symbol. stick figure displaying low affect overlaid with the no symbol. Two stick figures, one slightly taller than the other, making eye contact and smiling. A smiley face with no body attached. Some of the impact of Hassler's presentation, which I experienced in person at 4Cs in 2015, is lost as part of her argument involved the juxtaposition of her own self-presentation as a neurodivergent wheelchair user who identified as multiply disabled and did not have control over all of her body movements with the advice presented in these handbooks. Despite Hassler's skill at building rapport and connecting with writers, this advice seemed to say Turid should do everything she cannot, and it did not create space for people who move differently to have knowledge to share more broadly. And so this is the Michigan State University Writing Center homepage. Got some information about this same access that you're listening to, and then a statement on Black language matters. And then on the right side, the Facebook feed. And then the land acknowledgement from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And I am missing a little bit of the script or something is not working. So give me 1 second. There we go. All right, so finally, and not least importantly, institutional context matters. I've tried to draw examples from a range of institutional types, from different geographic regions, serving different student demographics, because all of these contexts shape who shows up in the center, what kind of resources are assumed to be necessary or important, how they are made available, how students and tutors come to understand their own roles and bring expectations to writing center context. So I also want to conclude by inviting you to think about the institutional and geographic context as they interact with your writing center and the possibilities for disability to emerge or not, as significantly interacting with and part of the groups your center serves and focuses. And so my last slide is 3 images that were shared with me by Rachel Herzl, Hervl, Betz, BETV, who is the director of the Nevada State College Writing Center. And it showed 3 scenes of a lively, bustling writing center with busy walls and clearly pre-pandemic opportunities of people gathering and working and writing together. And I wanted to include these images in the talk because most of the images publicly displayed on Writing Center websites were either posed group or individual shots of the Writing Center staff or of individual tutorials. And Rachel's images here suggest some of the many ways that writing centers serve lots of different kinds of roles and functions, only a small slice of which are readily available or shown on a website. So I wanted to give you a chance to do some writing and reflecting at the conclusion here. And we are running a little short on time, so I think I'm going to go ahead and move to questions, but I'll show you the slide here. I like to ask people to tell stories a lot because I think that the details that people put in their stories, how we describe them, what we call to mind, all give us a lot of really important information about what we're paying attention to and what we're not. But I'll just kind of turn things over to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Folks, please feel free to use the question and answer feature to submit your questions rather than the chat. We do already have a couple questions to get us started, so I think we can hop right in. Our first question is, are there ways that physical or virtual space can perhaps encourage students to feel safer disclosing disability? Meaning ways we introduce a session, things that we sort of affect. Can those things influence a student's sense of safety and disclosure?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. I think that the cue that people take about the safety of disclosure or not come from multiple places, not just the opening moment in the tutorial interaction. So one thing that I think can happen is acknowledging at various points different kinds of strategies, right? So we might do a lot of, we talk about the writing toolbox, so the two-way toolbox, and we kind of open up our toolbox and we say, here's something that might work, or here's some strategy to try. You can name disability as part of that, right? You can say, I know a lot of writers who have ADHD struggle with maintaining focus, and one thing that has been successful for these writers has included blah blah blah. And thinking about resource materials that are perhaps available in the writing center, a lot of centers that I've seen have handouts on the table. There will be like a little maybe plastic stand, and it's going to have various handouts, and seeing some of those titles, that disability is something that people are aware of or talking about in this center. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. The cues are not just in that interactional moment, right, but also in the sort of expectation and what's normalized as part of the everyday conversation.
Thank you so much. Our next question, what's one piece of practical advice you would give to someone just starting to implement accessibility measures into the physical or virtual space of their writing center?
Another great question. There's so many considerations that I hesitate to say, this is the one that you should do first. And I'm trying to think of the people who are doing this work really well. I think one of the things that I often start with in my own teaching, and this is a teaching example, but anytime you have an assignment, anytime you have an activity, you kind of ask, what would happen if someone couldn't? And the thing that I think about a lot is, what if someone on my Zoom screen can't see the slide that I'm displaying? And that could be because they're visually impaired, but it could also be because they're logging into Zoom on their phone. And so I'm always trying to think about, how can I, kind of replicate this or offer this in another way, another mode, another way of moving. So I ask a lot of questions about, what's rigid and fixed in the space or interaction or moment, and what's flexible and possible, and what am I aware of other ways of moving in that space. I'm not giving a specific, here's the thing that you should do first, because it really kind of depends on where you are. And so I might start with what the space that you have in front of you, and what are some of the things that are going to be movable, flexible, possible, and what are the things that are going to maybe present challenges for certain kinds of people who need certain ways of moving.
Thank you. Our next question comes with a little bit of context attached to it. This person writes, this has less to do with accessibility in the Writing Center and more to do with how we train tutors to talk about dis/ability. But I was talking to a group of tutors in training this morning about problematic narratives in personal statements. I brought up white savior narratives and inspirational, quote unquote, overcoming a disability narratives, end quote. But I don't feel like I did an excellent job of explaining why the latter is so problematic. Do you have any resources you'd recommend for training tutors to challenge problematic, oppressive language and ideas about disability in student writing?
Yes. So the person whose work I really want to point you to is Alison Hitt, Hitt. She had a book coming out soon, I hope very soon, about overcoming, and I think it's called Rhetorics of Overcoming. And one of the chapters, I think, specifically takes up writing centers and overcoming narratives. But the one of the things I will say very quickly to kind of respond to why overcoming narratives are problematic is because of the way that they often encourage thinking about disability as something bad or something that one wants to suppress or hide or not talk about. That we can only talk about disability if we've been incredibly successful or if we are clearly showing that the disability is, quote, not a problem. But that's simply not the case for many people, right? Like, so I would say about myself that I have been successful as a deaf academic, but I have not erased deafness. I have not erased the need for accommodation, the need for people around me to move differently, to build in accessibility practices. So it's really important that when we talk about disability, it not be treated as something that has to always be overcome to the point of not being a problem or not being a challenge for people.
Awesome. All right, let's see, what's our next one here? Would you consider the needs of international or domestic students with low English proficiency under the category of disability considerations and support?
I do not consider English proficiency or language proficiency to be a disability specifically. However, I do think that people who speak English as a second language, who are multilingual, who have varying degrees of competence with English are potentially disabled. They might have disabilities themselves. So I think that, language skills, multilingualism is often a strength. It's not often recognized as a strength, and it does present the need for particular kinds of resources. But we want to be really careful not to presume that people are always in one category, but not also in another. So you might have people who, are multilingual, but are also experiencing various disability or have disability identification. And I think that there are ways that thinking about access broadly can include both of those groups or think about the intersections of these groups.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions, which is fortunate since that's what we have in our little queue here. So question 1 of 2. I appreciated the way you modeled how to describe images for audience members. You used the phrase white presenting woman to describe Maggie Hamper. I would like to start introducing this language into my own presentations. Can you point me in the direction of any resources on language that can be used to respectfully describe people being presented in images that we use in PowerPoints? Thank you.
That's a very good question. I will say that I've learned a lot from people who do professional visual description. And Georgina Kliege, Kleege, has written a fair amount about visual description and how to think about it. I've also found, and I cannot remember offhand the names of the authors, but there's a few really great resources on effective image description. That's distinct from alt text, but both are really useful. And I like to think of image description as a way to call people's attention to what's meaningful about an image. So it's not just a means of kind of making sure that folks who can't see the image have some access to it, but it helps the people who are seeing it kind of cue into what it is that you want them to notice about it, or what is most relevant or salient. So there's a number of you can Google image description resources, and a lot of things will come up. So I recommend that.
Okay, we're down to our very last question of the day. And it's a good one, I think, to end on, because it will make us think broadly. What are the biggest invisible barriers to accessibility? Which features of accessibility are most overlooked?
Wow, well, that's a good one. I mean, I hesitate to say most overlooked because I really don't have any kind of like quantitative data on that. But I think that there's been some fantastic recent conversations in the last 5 to 6 years about mental disability, which is becoming more and more a topic of conversation in this pandemic, and thinking about trauma in particular, which I think is going to become a bigger and bigger conversation. And so thinking about the way that the kinds of trauma influence or affect how writers come to writing or approach the possibility of interactions around their writing. And Neil Simpkins, Simpkins, and Brenna Swift, Swift, recently wrote a fantastic piece about trauma in writing and thinking about ways to support writers who maybe or have experienced different kinds of trauma. That was published in Spark, SPARK, which is an online publication of the University of Michigan National Center for Institutional Diversity. But man, there's a lot, right? There's a lot of elements of accessibility, and one of the things that is really impossible is to try to account for all of them, because you just never know who's going to show up. So I hate being like the person who can't answer a question, but that's what I've got for you.
I mean, I think that's the best answer you can give, right, when something's that expansive. But it's a great way for us to think and reflect as we wind down our talk today. In the interest of everyone's time, we have hit that 2:00 mark. So Stephanie, I would just like to thank you again for joining us this afternoon for this fantastic talk, and for being so generous with your time and your knowledge and your expertise. We appreciate it more than we can tell you. And I know there's a lot of Writing Center folks here who are particularly excited to see this sort of talk be linked so closely to the work we're doing. Thank you again for your time. Thank you again for being part of our community today. And I know the Writing Center at MSU is looking forward to seeing you again at our staff meeting. For now, everybody, I hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining us, and keep an eye out for that post-event survey that I'm going to be sending. Thank you, everyone. Take care.